welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Thomas Sowell has studied and taught economics, intellectual history, and social policy at institutions that include Cornell, UCLA, and Amherst. Now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Dr. Sowell has published more than a dozen books, many more than a dozen books, actually. I was just too lazy to count them all up. The one with which we will concern ourselves today, his classic work, first published in 1987 and then republished last year, A Conflict of Visions. Segment 1, The Two Visions. Let me quote from A Conflict of Visions. Quote, "When interests are at stake, the parties directly affected usually understand what the issue is. However, when there is a conflict of visions, those most powerfully affected by a particular vision may be the least aware of its underlying assumptions." Explain that distinction between interests and visions.
Oh, interests are articulated. The people who have particular interests know what they are and know what they're trying to do.
If you're a farmer in Iowa, you want the ethanol subsidy because you'll get a higher price for your corn.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. With visions, it's different. These are the implicit assumptions with which you operate. You may not articulate them even to yourself, but you're assuming certain things when you talk or when you think. And seldom are those things spelled out.
Now, in A Conflict of Visions, you talk about two fundamentally differing visions. Mm-hmm. And these two fundamental visions underlie an enormous amount of the Western political tradition.
Yes.
The constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. Mm-hmm. Let me take a stab at a tight definition of each, and then you correct it for me. Mm-hmm. Under the constrained vision, an exemplar would be Adam Smith. Yes. Human nature is flawed, but it's fixed. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do we erect institutions that contain our flaws and permit us to live in the best possible society, given in effect the fallen nature of, or the fallen character of human nature? Fair?
Yes, absolutely.
So when you say constrained, it's a vision of human nature itself. Human nature is fixed, flawed, and therefore we operate within constraints. The constraints human nature itself provides. Unconstrained is human nature itself is malleable, and you say that Rousseau, man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. That's the classic statement of the unconstrained vision. Would you explain that?
Yes, that the things that we suffer, according to those with the unconstrained visions, it's because of the failure of other people to be as wise or as noble as themselves, because there are no inherent reasons for us to be unhappy.
So one looks at pain and difficulty in the world and says, well, this is the way life is. Mm-hmm. We'll never eliminate it. Let's be wise and prudent and direct institutions that make life as much better as possible. That's constrained.
Yes.
The unconstrained vision looks at pain and suffering and says we must remake the world. There are institutions causing this pain and suffering.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Now, let me give you another quotation. The two great revolutions in the 18th century in France and in America can be viewed as applications of these differing visions. Explain that one.
Well, in France, the idea was that if you simply put the right people in charge and created the right institutions, then all these problems would go away. In the United States, it was assumed from the outset that there were very limited things you could do, and what you needed to do above all was to minimize the damage done by the flaws of human nature. And this is why the United States, for example, has this Constitution, so much lamented by some of those who believe in the French Revolution, in which this group is offset by that group, and nobody can sort of run wild. If you believe that what you need is to have the right leaders who love the people and so on, a messiah, as it were, then your problems are solved. But if you don't believe there is any political messiah, and you believe that you have to make sure that all people are restrained in what they are able to do, then you have the separation of powers, you have elections, you have constitutions, you have all kinds of things hemming you in. Condorcet, who was the great supporter of the French Revolution, could not understand why there was this separation of powers, and not even when at the end of his life he was arbitrarily thrown into prison, where he continued to write about why the Americans have this separation of power. And of if there had been a separation of powers, he wouldn't be rotting in prison.
Right, right. Could I just, you've got France is the unconstrained vision, 18th century America is the constrained vision, founding fathers the constrained vision. Could I ask if it goes even farther back? What comes to mind is Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies. There's a famous chapter in there in which he contrasts Plato, whom he views as a radical, the man who wants rule by the philosopher kings, with Aristotle, whom he views as a kind of piecemeal reformer. What you get in Plato is the impulse to start anew, and what you get in Aristotle is the impulse to accept the givenness of things and make one change, see how it works, another change, see how it works. In other words, I guess what I'm getting at is there some sense in which these two visions can be traced all the way through the Western tradition?
Oh, absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's a fair statement.
Yes.
All right. Now, in this country, you talked about France versus the United States, but what about Americans versus Americans? John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson, for example? Is that a fair contrast? Adams would be constrained, Jefferson unconstrained?
To some extent, yes. Jefferson, when the complaint was made about the people who were innocent people killed during the course of the French Revolution, he said that I would rather that half the world be destroyed than that it should fail. But of course, as it went on, Jefferson backed away, and he did turn ultimately against it.
All right. So what you get,
he had a more unconstrained vision, but not totally.
Because what I'd like to do now is turn to these two visions as they play out in contemporary American politics. But before I do that, I want to make sure I understand you. Your vision is that the founding fathers, the fundamental institutions of the United States, reflect the constrained vision.
Absolutely.
And that therefore what you get within the American tradition is degrees of the constrained or the unconstrained vision. You don't get clean, sharp disagreements, or is that untrue?
Oh, you do get it. The whole erosion of the Constitution, largely by the courts, is the notion that no, we have to look out for the public interest, and therefore we won't worry about the constraints of the Constitution as much as some people would like.
This is the Vorthos Forum, and we approve this message.